Thank you, Mr. President. I am very happy to rise in support of this motion that notes that this council recognises International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia on Tuesday, 17th of May, that is also known as IDAHOBIT. Notes that since its first celebration in 2004, IDAHOBIT has drawn attention to the violence and discrimination experienced by lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex people and all other people with diverse sexual orientations, gender identities or expressions and sex characteristics. And 3, congratulates the Malinowskis Labor government on its opposition to conversion therapy and its commitment to make sure this practice does not occur in South Australia. I rise as the Green spokesperson on gender and sexuality to speak in support, strong support of this motion in its totality, and I thank the Honourable Ian Hunter for bringing this day of public importance to the attention of this council. The Greens believe that all people do have the right to their self-identified sex and gender. We do not tolerate the harassment, abuse, vilification, stigmatism or discrimination against a person simply because they are or are perceived to be intersex, transgender, bisexual, gay or lesbian. These are not issues of conscience for the Greens. They are issues of our policy, of common sense and, of course, of human rights. On the 17th of May, the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia, IDAHOBIT, marks the day in 1990 that homosexuality was finally removed from the International Classification of Diseases of the World Health Organization. And yet, over 30 years later, too much prejudice and intolerance remains in our society. It is our responsibility as legislators to dismantle the institutions of discrimination wherever we find them. Our community is broad and varied. No two people are the same. No one should be discriminated against for their gender, their sexuality, or for any other reason. Trans and gender diverse people often do experience discrimination at every turn, from family rejections to school-based bullying to street harassment and violence, all against a backdrop of the politics fueling how they can choose to live their own lives. Pre-pandemic research shows that 1 in 3 trans and gender diverse people in our country has experienced discrimination in their employment, resulting in an unemployment rate of 19%. That is more than 3 times the national average. Additionally, 1 in 4 report discrimination in accessing healthcare, ranging from misgendering to outright refusal of care. 3 in 5 have experienced verbal abuse, and 1 in 5 has been physically assaulted for being trans or gender diverse. Unsurprisingly, this constant and unrelenting stigma and discrimination has a detrimental impact on mental health, and a 2021 study found that nearly half of Australia's trans and gender diverse population has attempted suicide, revealing the depth of the problem facing gender and sexuality diverse communities. Since the onset of the pandemic, the Trans Committee has struggled significantly with job loss and financial strain, disruptions to their healthcare and social isolation from their support networks. Most staggeringly, during the pandemic, 61% experienced clinically significant symptoms of depression. 49% reported thoughts of self-harm or suicidal ideation. I, and as many of others have said before in this council, we do have to recognise the work of South Australia in leading the nation as the first state to decriminalise homosexual acts back in 1975. Of course, the 1972 murder by drowning of in Adelaide's Torrens River of Dr. George Duncan did raise that public awareness of the widespread harassment of the gay community, and it resulted in that push for law reform. But we should not need murders to push for law reform. This does not take away, of course, from the challenges still faced by the LGBTIQA+ community. That community and their allies are still deeply concerned about harmful and damaging conversion practices that are currently continuing legally in our state, even today. A 2021 survey of over 600 LGBTIQA+ South Australians, done by the South Australian Rainbow Alliance Network, known as SARA, found that 85% of respondents rated ending conversion practices as extremely important. Psychological research has produced overwhelming clinical evidence that practices aimed at the reorientation of LGBTIQA+ people not only do not work, but are extremely damaging to their long-term health and happiness. A 2018 joint report that was done by the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society and the Human Rights Law Centre shares the voices and lived experience of 15 people with experiences of conversion therapy. It found that all those participants shared experiences of deep grief and in some cases anger over being told that they were broken and needed fixing. All have experienced a profound sense of loss at the lives that they have had taken away from them. More broadly, research shows that survivors of conversion practices commonly experience PTSD symptoms related to religious trauma, difficulty forming relationships, and severe mental health difficulties, including increased likelihood of thinking about self-harm, enacting self-harm, thinking about suicide, and of course, attempting suicide. With legislative bans on conversion practices now in place in Victoria, Queensland and the ACT, it is time for South Australians to step up and protect all in our community from harm. This week I attended the SARA event for IDAHOBIT, where they premiered their Rainbow Realities video. Rainbow Realities is a short film featuring 4 South Australians discussing their lived experience of discrimination and how we as allies can take action against it. It is a short watch, but it's an important watch, and I recommend it to all in the Council. And it does indeed have a South Australian victim survivor of conversion practices speaking. They've had their identity shielded, but their words are incredibly powerful for us as legislators, and of course giving hope to other victims or victim survivors that change is coming. That film has been produced to support conversations about how individuals, organisations, governments, parliaments and the community as a whole can support the LGBTIQA+ community here in our state and, of course, more broadly. I do encourage all members of Parliament to watch it, practice active listening and reflect on how we can all work together to make South Australia a safer and more inclusive place. As part of IDAHOBIT, we do celebrate all we have achieved, and we are rightly proud that we have achieved in this state, but we also take this time to reflect on the work that still needs to be done. And that work includes banning conversion practices. We need to strengthen our anti-discrimination laws, and we need to continue to call out human rights abuse of the LGBTI community. Everyone deserves to feel safe and respected in our state. I do have some small amendments, Mr President, and I move them now. I move at paragraph 1, leave out the word Tuesday. May 17th fell on a Wednesday this week, Mr President, so I've simply removed the day but not kept the date, but I've kept the date. And in paragraph 3, leave out the word therapy and insert practices. Now, this is a far more substantial amendment that I move, Mr President, and I will explain why. Conversion practices are underpinned.
Franks, someone like to second that, please? Seconded. Continue, Ms Franks.
Conversion practices are underpinned by ideologies that view LGBTQA+ people as broken, and they assert that they can be healed to live supposedly healthy heterosexual lives, or with a gender identity consistent with their sex assigned at birth. They encourage people to live sexually pure lives through celibacy or abstinence, and ultimately they aim for people to change their orientation, gender identity or detransition. These practices are damaging. They are not at all therapies. They are not therapeutic. Therefore, the community has asked that we use the term conversion practices, and certainly in this motion I would hope that members of the Council will be willing to make that particular amendment. I also note that clinical or therapeutic formal methods of conversion practices, such as conversion organisations, behavioural and psychoanalytic therapies and clinical interventions have now largely ceased after being denounced by numerous professional health and human rights bodies, including the Australian Psychological Society and the AMA, the Australian Medical Association. So indeed, the use of the word therapy is not at all appropriate when describing these particular practices. I do note that there is a mooted amendment to remove the reference to the Malinowskis government promise and pledge to ban conversion practices. The Greens won't be supporting that amendment to remove those words. Indeed, we find that that's the most important part of this motion, the action that still needs to be taken. We congratulate the Malinowskis, then opposition and now government, for their promise. We look forward to them putting that promise through this parliament and legislation to ban conversion practices being imminent. The Premier has promised the people of South Australia he will keep all of his election promises. Mr President, I look forward to this one for being here before we celebrate the next IDAHOBIT Day and giving us one more thing to celebrate in this state. With that, I commend the motion.